Good evening and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. To the multitudes watching on Zoom and to the millions watching on YouTube, it is an honor and a privilege to have you all here tonight. I would love to try and get through 3 chapters. I think the likelihood is we will be doing chapter 3 and chapter 4 tonight of Sukkah. So let's get it up on the screen over here for you guys. And let's get underway. Okie dokie. Can everybody see it there on the screen? I'm going to take that as a resounding yes. Thumbs up if you can. Yeah, lovely. All right. So the 3rd chapter, moving on now from how we build a sukkah and sit in the sukkah, etc. Now we're going to turn to our Arabah minim, one of the other mitzvot of sukkah. So there are numerous rules when it comes to what our lulav and etrog and our hadasim and our aravot should look like. The verse says, "Ulekachtem hayom," that you should take today. And from here we learn the fact that since you should take it today, then it must be yours and it can't be stolen. So says the Mishnah in Perek Gimel Mishnah Aleph, lulav hagazul, a stolen lulav, is that going to be valid or not valid? It's going to be not valid. It has to be yours, not stolen. Lulav hagazul v'hayavesh, and a dry lulav. If you have a stolen or a dry lulav, pasul, it is going to be invalid for use. You will not be able to fulfill your mitzvah of taking the Arabah minim. Shel ashera v'shel ir hanidachas. What are these types of lulavim? These are lulavim that have been taken from an ashera tree, which is used for idol worship. That's a big no-no. V'ha'ir hanidachas, a condemned city where the Beis Din of Paskin that everybody is too immersed in idolatrous ways, and therefore the whole city is supposed to be condemned to be destroyed. So if you try and take a lulav from one of these places, pasul, invalid for use. Continues the Mishnah, niktam rosho, if the top of the lulav is chopped off, nifritsu alav, if the leaves of the lulav were so detached and split off from the center, says the Mishnah, everybody join in, pasul, they are invalid for use. Nifridu alav, if they're a bit spread apart, then kasher, then they're still going to be valid. The problem is whether they are separated from the bottom all the way up to the top, or if they are separated at the top but meet somewhere along the line. So obviously a lot of our lulav leaves are split, but they all meet and fuse together at some point along the lulav. So as long as they're not completely slid apart from the bottom, then they are going to be kosher. And that is why you will see people studying very carefully at the top, because the more beautiful lulavim will be fused, certainly in the center spine, they'll be fused very, very high up. So we've got to try and, people will look for a lovely fused, straight spine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ya'agdenu milamala. Rabbi Yehuda says he should tie it at the top of the lulav. Sinei har habazel kisheros. If you are using a lulav from the thorny palms of the iron mountain, kasherot. I've got a note here, as long as the tip of one branch meets the base of another. So I'm guessing what this means is you've got quite a jagged shaped palm frond. So as long as it is kind of all connected and consistent, then it is going to be kosher. Continues the Mishnah, lulav sheyesh bo shlosha tfachim ukdei lena'anei bo kasher. As long as your lulav is a minimum of 3 hand breadths in length, so that it's long enough to wave, it is going to be kasher. What this really means, though, is that it has to be 4 tefachim, so that you've got 1 tefach to hold it at the bottom, and then 3 tefachim to be able to shake it. So the minimum length is actually very, very tiny. Of course, our lulavim are considerably longer, but That would be the minimum length. 4 tefachim in total, 1 tefach to hold, 3 tefachim to be able to shake it. Continuing with the Mishnah base, we'll see a lot of parallels between the Mishnah that we saw just before. We turn now to the Hadassim. We turn to the Myrtle Branch. Hadas hagazel v'hayavesh pasul. If the myrtle branch is stolen or it is dry, it is going to be pasul for use. Shel asherah v'shel ir hanidachas pasul. If it's taken from an asherah tree used for idol worship or from a condemned city, it's going to be invalid for use. Niktam rosha. If the top is broken off, nifritsu alav, or the leaves are all detached. Or shahayu anavav merubas me'alav pasul. Or there are more berries, it translates it there, on the branch than there are leaves, then again it is going to be pasul. V'miyatam kasher. But if it's a minimal amount, it's going to be kosher. Ve'ein mamatin b'yomtav. But you're not allowed to remove the berries. So let's say you've got more berries than leaves, you can't now start picking the berries off on Yom Tov to leave yourself with a diminished berry count, if that makes sense. Moving on to Mishnah Gimel. We now deal with the Aravot, with the willows. Arabah gazula vivesha pasula. If you have a stolen willow branch or a dry withered willow branch, pasul. Shel asherah v'shel ir hanidachas pasula. If it is from an asherah tree used for idol worship or from a condemned city, pasula, it's going to be invalid for use. Niktam rosha, if the top of it is cut off. Nifritsu aleha, or the leaves are detached. Vahatzaptsafa, or the shape of the leaves are wrong. They are abnormally grown leaves. They are circular, for example, rather than an oblong shape. Psula, they are going to be invalid. Kumusha, if they are somewhat withered. Veshenashu miktsas aleha, if they're somewhat withered, or they've lost some of their leaves, v'shel bal, or they've been grown in irrigated soil. Sorry, shel bal is rain-watered soil. Kishera, they are nonetheless going to be kosher. And that is why you can start off with very lovely willows, and as the days go on, the leaves start to fall off and shrivel up, and it will still be kosher, as long as it's not completely dry and withered and shriveled. Continuing with Mishnah Daled, Rabbi Yishmael Omer. Rabbi Yishmael says, Shlosha Hadassim, Ushtei Aravos, Lulav Echad, Ve'etrog Echad. That when you are taking these species, you should take 3 branches of myrtle, 2 branches of willow, 1 lulav, and 1 etrog. Afilu shnayim ketumim ve'echad eino katum. Even if you have, with regards to your hadassim, even if 2 of them are cut off at the top and 1 of them is not, that will still be a valid taking of the 4 species. You have to have at least 1 kosher myrtle branch. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, afilu shaloshtam ketumim. Rabbi Tarfon says, even if all 3 of them are cut off, they're still going to be kosher, because according to Rabbi Tarfon, you don't need to be strict about hadassim having their tops cut off. Rabbi Akiva Omer, kashem shalulav echad ve'esrog echad, kach hadas echad va'arabah echas. In the same way, according to Rabbi Akiva, that you have 1 lulav branch and 1 etrog, so too you also only need to take 1 hadas branch, 1 myrtle branch, and 1 willow branch to fulfill the mitzvah of taking the Arabah minim. We do not, however, paskin like Rabbi Akiva, and that is why to this day you will still find people, crazy people, taking those 3 hadassim and 2 willow branches. Continuing with Mishnah Hey, we turn to our esrog. Uwa. Esrog hagazul v'hayavesh. If they are stolen or they are dry, invalid. They are pasul. Shel asherah v'shel ir hanidachas. If they are from an idol worshipping tree, no, trees cannot worship idols. They worship the tree as an idol. Or a condemned city, they will be pasul. Shel orla, some new terms over here. Shel orla pasul. If it is within the first 3 years of the etrog tree's growth, they are invalid for use. Why? Because it has to be yours. We said ulakachten, you have to take your esrog. And an orla esrog, in its first 3 years of the tree being around, you cannot, that won't be yours. You cannot own orla. You cannot utilize orla. So it can't be yours, and because it can't be yours, it is not fit for your usage. If it is from a tree that is used for idol worship or from a condemned city, it is going to be invalid for use. We did that one. Shel orla pasul. Shel teruma tamea pasul. If the esrog was designated as teruma for a kohen, and then it became tameh, it is going to be pasul, and that's because it can't be fit for any type of benefit. Shel teruma tahora. If it was designated as teruma and it was still pure, lo yitol, you should not take it for your mitzvah of shaking the arba minim. V'im natal kasher. But if you were to do it, it would be kosher for use. We are concerned that you may end up ruining it and you won't want to eat it. Imagine people getting their grubby little hands all over your esrog. You might not want to eat that later. And when it comes to teruma produce, it's supposed to be eaten and enjoyed by a kohen. Sholdamai, if it was an esrog that had an uncertain status with regards to its being tithed or not, so we have a machlokes. Beis Shammai poslim. Beis Shammai say that you're not allowed to use it. It's going to be invalid for use. And Beis Hillel machshir. And Beis Hillel say that you can use it. Why is there a machlokes? Because rich people are not supposed to be using demai, and therefore, since Beis Shammai, since some people cannot use it, therefore Beis Shammai say it's forbidden for everyone. And according to Beis Hillel, they say that since some people can use it, therefore it's kosher for use. Shomasa sheni b'Yerushalayim lo yitol. Again, when it comes to an esrog which has been separated as ma'aseh sheni to be taken to Yerushalayim, so the Mishnah says, lo yitol, you shouldn't take it. But again, v'notal kasher. But if you do take it, it is valid. I believe the reason will be similar, that it's supposed to be eaten. And if you're going to be spoiling it by everyone touching it, then it is not appropriate to be used for the mitzvah. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Vav. Other things now that will invalidate your esrog. It has to be hadar, it has to be beautiful. So says the Mishnah as follows: Alta chazazis al ruba. What if it translates that there is a rash, but some kind of blotchy manifestation on the majority of the esrog? Well, now it's losing its status as a beautiful, desired item. Nitla pitmaso, the pitum has come off. It's been removed. Niklaf, it is peeled. Nistak, it is split. Nikav v'chaser kol shehu, it has got a hole in it, or there's a piece missing. Says the Mishnah, pasul, it's going to be invalid for use. Alta chazasis al niuta, if it gets translated there again as a rash, but some kind of blemish, some kind of blotchiness on the minority of it. Nital uksa, if the bottom stem comes out. Nikav velochasar koshehu, if it gets perforated but nothing is missing from it, it says the Mishnah, kasher, then it's going to be valid for use. Continuing in the Mishnah, esrog hakushi pasul, if it is a black esrog, translates it there on the screen as Ethiopian, but what it means is it's an extremely very dark esrog. It's going to be pasul. V'hayarok kakarti, if it is a green esrog, even as deep a green as a leek, presumably it means the deep green part of the leek, not the very pale part of the leek. Rabbi Meir machshir, Rabbi Meir says it's going to be still valid, and Rabbi Yehuda is going to say it is pasul. What is the distinction between them? Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's no longer a beautiful, color to have for an esrog. What's your preference, guys? Hands up who likes green esrogim. Hands up who like nice golden yellow esrogim. Yeah, I'm a yellow man myself. Although this year, I decided not to go and risk being contaminated with coronavirus, so I arranged to have an esrog chosen for me, and it ended up being green. No, it was still kosher. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Zion, the 7th Mishnah of our chapter, says the Mishnah as follows. Shi'ur esrog hakata. Let's talk about the smallest minimum size for an esrog. How big or how small does it need to be? Rabbi Meir Omer ke'egoz. It has to be the size of a nut. Rabbi Yehuda Omer kabetza. Rabbi Yehuda says slightly larger. It has to be at least as big as an egg. Uvegadol, and the maximum size, kedei sheyochaz shnayim biyado achas. It has to be big enough, that, or still small enough, that 2 of these big esrogim can be held in one hand. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yossi Omer, afilu echad b'shtei yadav. Rabbi Yossi says it can be absolutely huge, even to a point that it is so big that it has to be held with 2 hands. I don't know if any of you have ever seen these Yemenite etrogim, but they are absolutely ginormous, and they would certainly fulfill this criteria of 1 etrog being held in 2 hands. And the halacha is, like Rabbi Yossi, the maximum size that we can have is a humongous, giant etrog. Either way, people like to use them for jam. I don't know if anyone's heard this, but that's really not a great idea, because apparently all the pesticides and everything that gets put onto these esrogim, apparently people do not recommend using them afterwards. Anyway, we move on with Mishna Tests, the 8th Mishnah. Ein ogdin es halulav ela b'mino. You should only wrap your lulav with something that is of the same species, and that is why when we have these cases that hold the components of the lulav together, they are made out of palm fronds, because the Mishnah says you should only bind your lulav with things, with strands from the same species. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says, afilu b'mashicha, you can even use a cord or string. Amar Rabbi Meir said, Matzah ba'anshe Yerushalayim. It even happened with people in Yerushalayim. Shehayu ogdin es lulvehen begimonir shel zahav. They wrapped and bound their lulav together with strands of gold. Imagine that, must have been beautiful to look at. Amru lo, however, they said to him, b'mino hayu ogdin osa milamata. Don't be fooled. They had the actual binding, the lower layer, the lower layer of binding was done with palm frond, not with the gold. The gold was a beautiful enhancement to what was on top. But make no mistake, they were still binding their actual lulav with palm fronds. Says the Mishnah in Mishna Tests, at what point are we supposed to shake our lulav? Where in the service do we actually shake our lulav? Answers the Mishnah, it's supposed to be done at the beginning and at the end of Hodu. And also when we say the words Ana Hashem Hoshiana, according to Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai Omrim, Beis Shammai say, Ana Hashem Hatzlichana. Even when we say Ana Hashem Hatzlichana, we don't paskin like that. We don't do that. Amar Rabbi Akiva said, Sofer Hayisi b'Rabban Gamliel u'Rabbi Yehoshua. I observed Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua shekol ha'am hayu menanim es lulveihem, that all of the other people davening in their shul were waving their lulavim, v'hein lo ninu ela ba'ana Hashem Hoshiana, and they only piped up and started waving when it got to the point of Hallel, where they said or sang Ana Hashem Hoshiana. Continues the Mishnah, Misha babaderech v'lo haya biyada lulav litol. If a person is traveling on a journey and he did not have a lulav to be able to do the mitzvah, when he gets home, he should take it. Says on the screen there, even if he's at his table. So before he sits down to eat, he should nonetheless perform the mitzvah of shaking the lulav. Lo nital shacharis, if a person was not able to take the lulav and shake it in the morning, yital bein arbaim, he should take it at any time before sunset, before dusk. Shekol hayam kasher lulav, because the whole day is actually valid for shaking the lulav. And that is why the Lubavitchers will stand on the street the whole day and wait for people to pass by so that they can invite them to do the mitzvah of shaking lulav. Or, if you have a mobile sukkah, you might do it as well, like we did this year. Continuing the Mishnah in Mishna Tests. Mi shehaya eved or isha or katan makrinosa. If a person required their slave or a woman or a minor to read Hallel for them, meaning that they would kind of lead it and you would follow along, perhaps because you don't know how to read the words well, you don't know how to read Hebrew properly. So a person may require someone to say it for them first and then they'll repeat it. So the Mishnah says, so you should answer and repeat after them what they say, but may a curse be upon such a person. It is a bad thing if we do not know how to read, and so rather than suffer through the curse of not being able to read, surely it is better for people to refine their Hebrew reading skills. If an adult is reciting for him, then what should happen? Then you can repeat after them Hallelujah, meaning, what does this mean? That someone can lead on your behalf. Is that right? Interesting. So there was a minhag. What they used to do was they would say the word Hallelujah after half of a verse or after each verse. And so if an adult male is reading on your behalf, then you would be able to include that as part of your Hallel recitation as well. Moving on to Mishnah Yud Aleph, says the Mishnah, we're talking about the doubling up of the verses that we know are so prevalent in Hallel. Makom shenahagu lichfol yichpol. If you are in a place where they have the custom to double up the words, meaning like the chazan will sing, and then the community will say back, yeah, etc., etc. So in a place where that is the way in which it's done, then you should do it. If, however, lifshot, yifshot, if you're in a place where it's only said once, then you only say it once. Levarich acharav, yevarich acharav. Where the custom is to recite the blessing afterwards, you should recite the blessing afterwards. Hakol kamin hagamedina. Everything is dependent on the local custom. Halokeach lulav mechavera b'shvius. If a person buys a lulav from his friend during the year of Shvius, nosen lo esrog b'matana. He should give the esrog as a gift. It shouldn't be something that people should be purchasing on the years of Shavuos, because it is something that is growing on a tree. You can, and it's going to be something that can be eaten. You can't buy these things on Shavuos; they are ownerless. So therefore, it should be given as a gift along with the rest of the Arabah minim. That's why even in the years of Shavuot, we're still able to purchase and buy our Arabah minim, although we're not paying for the esrog. We're just paying a ridiculously inflated price for the lulav and the myrtle and the willows. Continuing with Mishnah Yud Beis, Mishnah 12. Barishona haya lulav nital b'mikdash shiva. In earlier times, at first in history, they would take the lulav for 7 days in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Uva Medina, and in the provinces outside of the Beis HaMikdash, only Yom Echad, it would only be taken on 1 day. Mishecharav Beis HaMikdash, once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted, Shehei Lulav Nital B'Medina Shiva, Zeichel HaMikdash. It was instituted that everybody should take the lulav for 7 days as a Zeichel HaMikdash, as a commemoration in memory of the temple. V'sheyehei Yom Henef Kulo Asur. But he also decreed that on the whole of the day of waving, Kula asa. It would be forbidden to eat the new produce. So I think this is talking about the day of the lifting of the Omer offering, the Korban HaOmer, which was the second day of Pesach, on which it would be prohibited to eat from the new grain. So if I'm not mistaken, at the time of the temple, on second day Pesach, they would bring the Omer offering, and from a certain point in the day, it would be acceptable to start eating food that was produced from new grain grown after a certain point. But after the destruction of the temple, it was decreed that you'd have to wait throughout the whole of the second day of Pesach and only start eating new produce after that point. Why is it brought here? Because there's a very strong parallel between the 7 days of Sukkot and the 7 days of Pesach, being both festivals. Very strong connection going on with Pesach and Sukkot. So that is why it's included at the end of our Mishnah. Over here, Mishnah Yud Gimel, Mishnah 13. So in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, where they only took the lulav for 1 day, it would seem that they would shake the lulav even on Shabbos, but they would bring it to shul before Shabbos. So says the Mishnah, in light of that brief introduction, Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag Shechal Lihiyos b'Shabbos. If the first day of Yom Tov is falling on Shabbos, Kol Ha'am Molichin Es Lulveihem Lebeis HaKnesses. Everybody would take their lulav in to shul on the Friday, so that it's in shul for them the following day. Lemacharas Mashkimin Luvayim. The following day they would wake up and come to shul. Kol Echad ve'Echad Makir Es Shelo. Each one would recognize their own lulav, and then they would take it. And in so doing, you are taking a lulav on the first day that you own. Because the sages said, the reason for that is that the rabbis say that you cannot fulfill your obligation with your friend's lulav. It's supposed to be one that you own. And on the rest of the days of Yom Tov, a person can fulfill his obligation with the lulav of his friend. That's why we'll have this whole concept of literally when we give a lulav to somebody else to shake on Yom Tov, we are literally giving them the ownership of that lulav to be able to fulfill the mitzvah. And then we have to hope that they decide to give it back to us and give it to us to become the owners once again. If not, it could be that a person is not fulfilling the mitzvah of taking their own lulav and esrog. It's fascinating, really. By the way, if anyone ever has questions, do just unmute yourself and throw it out there. There's only a couple of million people watching you on YouTube. Mishnah Yud Daled. Rabbi Yossi Omer. Rabbi Yossi says, Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag, on the first day of Sukkot, Shechal Liyos b'Shabbos, which falls on Shabbos, the Shachach v'Hotzi es halulav lirshus Arabah. He forgot, and he carried his lulav in the public domain. Patur mipnei shotzi b'rishus. He is not going to be liable since he was doing it with the intention of doing a mitzvah, doing a religious act. So he takes on the status of an onus. He was doing it completely inadvertently, and he won't be chayev. He won't be liable for any repercussions for having done that mistake on the Sabbath. Final Mishnah of Perek Gimel. Mikabeles isha miyad bana umiyad ba'ala umachaziratu lamayim b'Shabbos. Says the Mishnah, a woman may receive a lulav from her son or from her husband and put it back in water on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, b'Shabbos machzirin. On Shabbos you would be allowed to return it back into water if it was being kept in there. B'Yom Tov mosifin. On a Yom Tov day, you may even add water to where you're leaving the esrog. Uva moed machalifin. And on Chol HaMoed, you would be allowed to change the water completely. Katan hayodeh l'naneh chayav b'lulav. If a minor knows how to shake a lulav, then it would be they would be chayav to take the lulav to be able to shake it and get some practice hours in, or minutes, on shaking the lulav. One moment. Yeah, we're talking about the time when the Beis Hamikdash stood, by the way, that you would be able to return the lulav to water. Nowadays, of course, we would not be able to return it to water. So that's important to get it in there. Mazel tov, everybody, on completing Perek Gimel. Thumbs up if you're ready for Perek Daled. Good on you, guys. Here we go then with Perek Daled. Let's see how we get on with this one. Now, lulav va'arava. When it comes to performing the mitzvah of shaking the lulav and the arava, shisha v'shiva. That can be conducted on either 6 days or 7 days. We're going to flesh all of this out as the Mishnayot go on in this chapter. Ha'halel v'hasimcha shmona. The days of halel and rejoicing would take place over 8 days. Sukkah v'nisuch hamayim, the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah, the mitzvah of nisuch hamayim, the additional component of water libations that were brought during sukkahs, takes place for Shiva, takes place on 7 days. V'hachalil chamisha v'shisha. And the flute, which we'll come to shortly, for the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, for the celebrations that took place, that can take place either on 5 days or 6 days. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Beis, Lulav Shiva Ketzah. How do we get to a point where we are taking the lulav for 7 days? Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag, Shechal Lihiyos B'Shabbos. If Shabbos falls on the first day of Yom Tov, Lulav Shiva, then you would be taking, in the Beis Hamikdash, of course, you would be taking the lulav on 7 days of Yom Tov. Ush'ar Kol Hayamim Shisha. In all other instances, it is taken for 6 days, because we don't take it on Shabbos, certainly nowadays. So in all other instances, it will be taken on 6 days. Mishnah Gimel, Arabah Shiva Ketzah. What about taking the Arabah? They used to take willow branches and would prop them up against the side of the Mizbeach. So disassociated, separate to the Aravot, which are inside the Arba Minim, they would have willow branches that they would bring to the Beis Hamikdash to put against the side of the Mizbeach. And if I'm not mistaken, that is what would have been taken on Hoshana Rabbah. That's the kind of carryover concept that we have. So Arabah Shiva Ketzad. How would you have had these, the mitzvah of the Arabah over 7 days? Ketzad. Yom Shvi'i Shal Arabah Shechal Liyos B'Shabbos Arabah Shiva Ushar Kol Hayamim Shisha. So if the 7th day of the ritual of the Arabah fell on Shabbos, then it would last 7 days. In all other instances, it would last for 6 days. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Daled, Mitzvahs Lulav Ketzad. How did they do the mitzvah of Lulav? How was it carried out? Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag Shechal Liyos B'Shabbos. If first day Yom Tov was falling on Shabbos, Malichin es lulveihen lahar habayis, they would take their lulavim to the Beis Hamikdash. V'hachazanim mekabim mehen, and the officiants, is it translated as the attendants, would take them from them. The Sodrin Osan al Gav Ha'itztaba, and they would arrange them al Gav Ha'itztaba. They would arrange them, it translates it there, on top of the portico. V'hazakenim manichin es shelahem belishcha. The elders would lay theirs in a chamber. Umelamdim Osam Lomar, and they would teach them and train them to say, Kol mi shemagia lulavi biyado. Okay, we have to realize that we've got a problem here, that it's not going to be possible to have thousands of lulavim perfectly organized in the Beis Hamikdash. So they have to leave them there before Shabbos. We had a similar concept with leaving them in shul before Shabbos. So in the Beis Hamikdash, thousands of people would be leaving their lulavim, in which case they have to forego their ownership of their lulavim. So they would encourage everybody to say, Kol mi shemagia lulavi biyado. Anyone who gets my lulav in his hand, harehu lo b'matana. I give it to him as a gift. I relinquish my ownership, and it should be his to own. Lemachar mashkin min uvaim. In the morning they would wake up and they would come to the Beis Hamikdash. V'hachazanim zorkin osan lifneihem, and then they would throw the lulavim out to everybody. And what would happen is that they would snatch at them, they would end up getting into fights. And when the Beis Din saw that it was a bit of a dangerous practice, they institute, okay, guys, you know what? We're not going to do this in the Beis Hamikdash anymore. Everyone can just take their lulav and esrog at home, and that way we don't risk any bad things happening. It's interesting. We saw something in Masechet Yoma, if you recall, that they used to all run up the ramp, and in order to avoid any danger, they prevented that from happening as well. Mishnah Hey. Mishnah Hey, the fifth Mishnah. Mitzvahs Arabah Ketzad. How did they do the mitzvah of Arabah? How did they perform that? Makom Haya Lamata Yerushalayim. There's a place below Yerushalayim, V'nikra Matzah. And this place was known as Matzah, not to be confused with unleavened bread. Yordin Lasham, they would go down there. I paused for laughter there. Nothing. Yordin Lasham, they would go down to this place called Matzah. Umalaktin Misham Murabios Shel Arabah, and they would gather tall branches of willow. How tall? Well, they were going to be putting them against the Mizbeach. So it seems that if the Mizbeach was 10 cubits tall, these branches were at least 11. Uvoyin v'zokfin osam b'tzidei Mizbeach. They would come and they would prop them up. They would bend them over. They would bend them over the altar. So they weren't just propped up; they were bent over, and that's why we know that they were so long. And the tops were bent over the altar. Taku v'heiru v'taku. They would blow a shofar. They would blow a tekiah, a teruah, and a tekiah. Each day they would go around the mizbeach one time. V'omrim, Ana Hashem Hoshiana. Oh Lord our God, give us salvation, make us prosper, even better. Ana Hashem Hatzlichana. Please Hashem, give us success, make us prosper. What am I just? Interesting. Am I reading this wrong? Save us and okay, fine. There we go. I'm trying to help myself to the translations on the screen. They're not helping me. Ana Hashem Hoshiana. Please, O Lord, save us. Ana Hashem Hatzlichana. Please, Hashem, give us success, make us prosper. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ani v'ho Hoshiana. Ani v'ho Hoshiana. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. V'oso hayom, makifin es ha-mizbeach sheva pamim. And on that day, on the last day, they would go around the Mizbeach 7 times. Is this sounding familiar at all, people? I certainly hope so. B'shas P'tirasan, at the time when they would depart, Mahin Omrim, what would they say? Yofi lach Mizbeach, Yofi lach Mizbeach. They would say, O altar, beauty is to you. O altar, beauty is to you. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer said they would say, Liyah v'lach Mizbeach. To you, God, and to you, the altar. And they would say that twice. Lekah v'lach Mizbeach. O altar to the Lord, and to you, O altar. Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Vav. So on Shabbos, you could not bring bundles from Matzah to the Beis Hamikdash. So let's see what Mishnah Vav has in store for us. In the same way that they performed in the weekday, so too they performed on Shabbos. Ella, except they would gather the branches from Matzah on Erev Shabbos, on the Friday, and they would place them into golden basins in order that they should not wither. Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says, and he said they used to bring palm branches, and they would beat them into the ground on the sides of the altar. And that day was called the day of the beating of the palm branches. Why did they do that? Do I need to know? So they would not bring the palm branches then, and they would use these. Okay. So instead of calling it the 7th day, the day of the Arabah, they would call it the day of Chibut Charias, of beating the palm branches. I guess that's the origins of our custom of beating the willows as well. Don't know if anyone's got better interpretations in their books, but that's about as helpful as I can be. Says the Mishnah, Mishnah Zayin. Says the Mishnah, Miyad hatinokos shomtines lulvehen v'ochlin esrogehen. So immediately after beating the willows, or beating the palm branches, the children would undo their lulavs, because they're not going to be needed anymore, and they would eat their esrogim. Not a practice that we necessarily want to do nowadays. But you can't use it for any other use. So that it seems is what they would use it for. Says the Mishnah in Mishna Tests, Hahalel v'hasimcha shmona ketzad. So we're trying to ascertain how the different lengths of days apply to different mitzvahs. So when it comes to Hallel and when it comes to rejoicing for 8 days, how did this work? Melamed shechayav adam b'Hallel uvasimcha uvechvod yom tov ha'acharon shel chag kishar kol yemos echad. So this teaches that one is obligated to say Hallel and to rejoice and to honor the festival on the last day, just as he is on all of the other days of the festival, the last day being Shmini Atzeres, which is not part of Sukkah. Sukkah, and don't forget, it's 8 days in Eretz Yisrael and 9 days outside, because we do Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah separately. Sukkah, Shiva, Ketzad. When it comes to the mitzvah of Sukkah lasting for 7 days, how does this work? Gomar mile'echol, once he has finished eating his meal on the 7th day, lo yatir sukkaso, he should not untie his sukkah. But he can start to take things out of his sukkah from the time of mincha and onwards, in order to give honor to the last day of Yom Tov, of Shmini Atzeres, in order to give honor to that, because you wouldn't be sitting in your sukkah, so you can start to take things out of your sukkah and bring them back into your house. Here we go with Mishna Tests. Nisuch Hamayim. Is that where I'm up to? Yes. Nisuch Hamayim Ketzad. How did they perform the mitzvah of the water libation? Nisuch Hamayim. Says the Mishnah. Slochis Shel Zahav. There was a golden flask. Machazekes Shloshes Lugim. Hayamamale Min Hashiluach. They would take a golden flask that could hold a volume of 3 log of water, and they would fill it from the shiluach, from the water source just outside of the base Hamikdash. Higiu l'shar hamayim. They would arrive to the shar hamayim. Where is the shar hamayim? Look how quickly I managed to do that. There is the shar hamayim. Hope everyone can see that. There is the shar hamayim. Says the Mishnah, Taku v'heiru v'taku. They would blow a tekiah, they would blow a teruah, and they would blow another tekiah after that. And this is every day, because every day they would bring a water libation in the morning at the time of the Korban Tamid. And so that's the additional libation that was brought. So they would arrive at the water gate. It would be a whole procession. They would blow a tekiah, a teruah, and a tekiah. Continues the Mishnah. Ala bakevesh. They would go up the ramp of the altar. Ufana lismolo, and they would turn to their left. Shnei safalim shel kesef hayusham, and there they would encounter 2 silver holes. It translates there 2 silver bowls. Rabbi Yehuda Omer shel sid hayu. He says they were made of lime or plaster. Ela shahayu mushcharim paneim ibnei hayayim. But they looked silver because their surfaces were darkened from pouring wine over them. Umenukavim kamin shenei chatanim dakim. They each had a hole like a nostril. Echad me'ube ve'echad dak. One was a wide opening and the other was a narrow opening. In order they could both be emptied at the same time. Ma'aravi Shalmayim, the one designated for water was on the west side, and Mizrahi Shal Yain, and the one on the east was for wine. Eira Shalmayim Letoch Shal Yain, they would pour the flask of water into the bowl that was for wine, V'Shal Yain Letoch Shal Mayim, and then they would take the one of wine and pour it into the one for water. No, let me try that one again. Maravi Shalmayim, the water bowl was in the western side, and the eastern one was for wine. Let me just see if we can find that in our Mizbeach over here. These two black markers over here, that's what we're talking about. Okay? So, with that in mind, now I'll read this next part correctly. I'm sorry, I'll read that again. Eira Shalmayim Letoch Shal Yain, if you ended up pouring water into the one designated for wine, V'Shal Yain Letoch Shal Mayim, or you ended up pouring wine into the one that's actually designated for water, nonetheless, the Mishnah says, Yatzah, you would fulfill your requirement. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Balog Hayamanasech Kol Shmona. He actually says that it was only performed with one log of water for the 8 days. V'lemanasech Omrim Lo, and the priest who was performing the pouring of this water, they would say to him, Hagbei Yadecha, lift up your hand, raise your hand, Shepam Achas Nisech Echad Al Gabi Raglav, because on one occasion someone ended up pouring the water all over their feet. Ugamuhu Kol Ha'am Beis Rogeim, and they all got really upset that he ruined this whole amazing spectacle, and they all pelted him with their esrots. How wonderful. Final Mishnah of tonight, of chapter 4, Mishnah Yud. K'ma'asehu b'chol kach ma'asehu b'Shabbos. The procedure was performed in the same way during the week as it was on Shabbos as well. Ela shahaya memale me'erev Shabbos chavis shel zahav. But again, because of the issue of transferring the water and filling it on Shabbos, they would fill the water up on Erev Shabbos, but they would fill it into a golden barrel she'ena mekudeshes, that was not sanctified, otherwise it can't come out of the Beis HaMikdash. Min hashiluach, from the water source. Umanicha belishka, and then they would put it in a chamber in the Beis HaMikdash. Nishbacha, if it got poured out, or nisgalsa, or if it was left uncovered overnight. If it was left uncovered overnight, it would be unfit for use. So what if that happened? Then they would just fill it up with water from the basin. Shahayayin v'hamayim hamagulin pasulin lim legabe hamizbeach. Because wine or water that would be left uncovered overnight would be unfit for sacrificial use. It would be unfit for usage on the altar. Mazel tov, everybody, on finishing chapter 4. And that's all for tonight. So join us next week, and we will do the final chapter of Masechet Sukkah. And not only that, but as a special treat, we will also do the first chapter of Maseches Beitzah, which is coming up next time on Mishnah Mastery. In the meantime, have a wonderful and meaningful night.